All right, well, we will get started with a review, and hopefully it will be figured out at some point along the way. We're in the book of Esther. So if you'll go ahead and be turned over there, we're going to just put it into context for you, especially since I had a week off from teaching. So what I remind you of is that this is going on, and it falls within the post-captivity time period. Okay, so this is after they have rebuilt the temple and people are back in Jerusalem, but at the same time they have people who are over and still back at what we have in Susa, which is in Persia, after they conquered Babylon. So you go through and you look at this as it falls through and you see all these people. And so the dates we're talking about the 480s, okay, BC. And so we're talking about that in the 480s BC. It's in Susa or Shushan, the palace, which was one of the royal cities. They like to build some of these things up. And the overall idea of this book that we will get to in more detail when we review it all is God's providence means divine deliverance. It is that general idea about, and a greatest demonstration really we have, of how God can work and provide for his people in non-miraculous ways. So that's what we see. So as we've gone through the book, essentially what you have is the first two chapters are your exposition. Here's why, the setup, all these things that are needed to be in place. And essentially it was, you got Xerxes established as the temperamental ruler who dethrones a queen. That leaves an opening. And then you have rags to riches queen as Esther is brought in. And you have a little bitty vignette there about Mordecai that is important, about his reporting on a coup attempt. So then you get the rising conflict, and that is, okay, no conflict to that point that was a problem for the Jews. But when you enter into chapter 3, all of a sudden we're going to have a big problem, because you've got a new person on the scene, Haman, and because he doesn't like Mordecai bowing down before him, he decides he's going to wipe out everybody who has that in their conscience, so all Jews that might use it as a reason not to bow before him. So he's a narcissist, but he's our antagonist for the story. In chapter 4, in response then, Mordecai makes this known to Esther, who has to then make a decision about what she's going to do, and she's pushed very hard, but she also responds very well. If I perish, I perish. So after 3 days of fasting and prayer, the decision of what she figures out to do begins in chapter 5 with inviting the king to the banquet. She shows up. He extends the scepter, which is important for making sure that she was accepted and could live. And then she asks for a meeting with the king and Haman and having a banquet. Just come to a banquet. And so they go and they have this banquet, and Haman's all excited. Everything's great. And the only problem is that he goes on his way home, and there's Mordecai not bowing down to him. And so he complains about this to his family and friends, and they console him and tell him what a wonderful guy he is for hating people he doesn't know and for wanting to kill people. And matter of fact, why don't you just get rid of Mordecai, go to the king, get rid of Mordecai, and all your problems will be over. Right. But what we have happen instead is that the king can't sleep. So we've had the first banquet. That night the king can't sleep. Doesn't say why, but he has his records read, and that's when he's reminded of what happened, and specifically with Mordecai saving him. And so he wants to then, let's do something for him. And this is when now Haman comes in. He's up early. Let's go have Mordecai killed. Let me get that straight from the king early. He's walking in. And so the king says, hey, let's find out from who's available. Well, there's Haman. So he asks Haman, well, what do I do for somebody the king wants to honor? And of course, what do we have? We have our narcissistic answer. He's got to be me. and he provides a long thing, and all of this is designed, as we looked at 2 weeks ago. He puts everything out there that is just razor thin margin from not appearing as royalty. Everything is as royally oriented. He wants to be looked at as close as possible as the king and paraded before everyone in that way. But this is an important part of our story because it's not about him. It's about his mortal enemy Mordecai, who now Haman has to lead. And so everything is flipped at that moment. He's now embarrassed. He is, having to trudge through and lead through this and proclaim all this great honor for Mordecai. And he's just devastated, goes back home, and then he gets what we saw at the end. These same people who told him that all the answers to his problem could be taken care of, just go to the king and get Mordecai killed. Now they say, you know what? Mordecai and his people, you're not going to be able to do anything about that. That would have been great advice the last time, but hindsight here. So they say it's not going to work out. So that's where it leaves us as we look then the end of chapter 6, verse 14, and going through chapter 7. And I divide it that way because of the nature of story. Okay, so here we have an opportunity. We've had the first banquet. We've had the interlude with everything flipped. So on either side of this now, we get the second banquet. So you got a banquet on either side of this chapter that everything flips. And that's going to be important later on. So what do we have throughout this? I want you to look for. So here's the layout of the story. You have in verse 14 and then verse 1 of chapter 7, this is the exposition of here's what's going on. Okay, here's what the setup for what's going to happen in this story, what has to be there first. Then the rise in action, where you get conflict. Okay, this is where the conversation turns as we get down to what is the actual request. The climax happens then with, okay, here's the problem. And immediately okay, things just changed. How much they changed are seen in the fall in action, what happens as a result of Haman being pointed out. And then it has this little nice thing at the end of how are we going to all feel about this? Is by showing us how the king feels. Okay, so let's look at this. You've got, again, the same kind of banquet situation. You have the king as a ruler who's kind of clueless, right? That's what we said. He's kind of away from people. He's not always knows everything going on. So you've got him, but he's in charge. Haman, who is the jester here and a fool. And that's what plays out is that he thought that he was really, when we meet him in chapter 3, he's devious. And here in chapter 7, the one who was super devious and thought he was absolutely the best is then portrayed as you now are the victim of your own devices here. So, and that part about being a victim of yourself is an important theme that you have in this book. Esther is essentially, there's probably a better name for it, but a seducer or seductress, and that is she's luring this, she's pulling them in together to get all this to happen. So she's got a plan, and she's playing this out. So it's not a negative thing, it's just she's kind of setting the trap for all of this and luring them to, hey, get together. We've already had one banquet. Wasn't that nice? We're going to come back for the second banquet, and we're going to get all this to work. Okay, so that's where we are. So now let's take a look at the text and see how this works. So we start with the exposition of chapter 6, verse 14, and then into chapter 7, verse 1. So this picks up where the people, the friends and wife, were talking to him. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. And I put it here and moved it into this section because it identifies the banquet as being the topic. Here's where we're going, and we got to have motion. All of this is happening swiftly. Do you get the feel of how things are moving now? How quickly everything is moving? So he's going to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. Now notice what has happened here. This morning, okay, he got up early to go to the king. He went to the king in order to get an order for Mordecai to be killed. Instead, he finds out, as he shows up, that exactly the opposite. Mordecai is going to be honored. He's going to be the one that's doing the work to honor him. Then after having done that very same morning, he's embarrassed. He goes back home to report of what happened based upon what they advised him the previous night. He's going back. He's upset. And now they've had to come get him. Okay? Now, think about what had to happen. Because if you've got eunuchs from the king, right, the royal house, they've come to get him. He's not here. Well, I sent him out. He must be somewhere else. Had to go home. Right? Why didn't he just come back? Right? After he paraded, he'd come into the palace. He then goes and he parades around and does what he's supposed to with Mordecai. He doesn't go back to the palace, though. He goes home. Okay? So they had to send somebody. He had been there originally. They have to send someone to go get him. Little bit of indication of state of mind here. So now, remember this banquet? You're supposed to be there. Pull him off. There's a hint here of this happening, of that it's showing, just like what all of chapter 6 kind of do, is that Haman's no longer in control of this narrative. He's no longer positive man showing up. He's now having to kind of be summoned. Okay? It's subtle, I understand, but I want you, there's a feel to it. So here this has already gone off, so the even getting to the second banquet is different. So, but now we have the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. So we've already seen this play out once, going in. Okay, this is quite an honor. Remember, he stated this in chapter 5 afterwards, what a huge honor this was. I mean, you're with the king and the queen and that's it. And it's by Esther's request. The queen requests your presence. That's important. And now we're doing it again. So you've got the juxtaposition of all this feeling of honor with what he's actually experiencing in life opposite that, which is embarrassment. Okay? So when you get to this, when you have all this, what's leading to the conflict, we don't have any conflict yet in this chapter. Okay? So Haman is summoned to Esther's second banquet. We've got to get him there for there to be any kind of conflict. And now you have him there. So that's all that you need is the setup that he's upset, but he has to get there. You move him over there, we're going to have the banquet. So what happens next? Rising action. Now we get to where, how are things going to move forward from here? So let's read verses 2 through 5. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request up to half the kingdom? It shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" Okay. All right. Isn't that a great section? All right. So you go from this banquet. She had not told him the first time. She wanted to get a feel for where he was, get him in the right mood, to where he was interested in her, remembering her, doing this. Now when it says on the second day, the first day was the first banquet, the second day is the second banquet. Okay? So at the second day now of all this going on, the banquet of wine, okay, we're going to ask you again. What's your petition? What do you want, queen? And it's the same kind of thing. It should be granted you what is your request up to half the kingdom. I've told you before, that's kind of just a hyperbole way of saying I have all of this at my disposal. I'll give you anything except for essentially control of the kingdom. Not really meant, but that's the nature of the wording. It should be done. But now let's look at how she answers. Because in the record here, she starts again with respect. Okay? If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king. Okay? So you start off being respectful. We don't have tone of voice, which is really hard in a section like this. But it is, you see in the nature of the wording, though I would not be the one to check on the Hebrew for this, but if I found favor in your sight, O king, if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. Okay, that's the big reveal, right? Because I want you to put yourself in the situation of the king as she's saying each one of these things. So the first part, just as he has been, there's an official kind of way in which he tells people they can make a request. There are expectations of respect of how you would address the king as you make your request. But then, immediately then, she simply identifies, here's the request. Save me and my people. Now, you're the king. Notice how she is playing this out. I mean, he's feeling good now about her. And he knows he doesn't understand any of this. Even though he signed the decree. Okay? Again, tells you something about him. And I think someone said, you'd think he'd put two and two together at some point, right? Well, all I'll say is apparently math was not his best subject. Okay, so you come through and you look at what he's saying. I want you to think about what he's hearing. Okay, she builds on this, and the nature of how she builds this out emotionally is powerful. For we have been sold. What does that immediately bring up in your mind? Slavery. Okay, we've been sold, my people and I, but not to slavery. And notice this rhythm. It's very Hebrew in terms of the threes, but we all like this wording. To be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. So you have essentially the idea of destruction, which can go a lot of ways. It could just take say your goods and all those things. To be killed. Oh, it's about death. It's not some kind of just slavery. To be annihilated. It's genocide. It's everybody. It's an emotional buildup because by the nature of this is, don't think, king, that I've misread what this is. Here's what's actually designed to happen. I'm not using hyperbole. I'm not exaggerating here. This is what it's about. And then she backs off, which you understand next why she used the phrasing, we have been sold, because now she's going to come back to that. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue. So she started with the idea that maybe you'd indicate it was slavery. That would have been bad enough as far as the king was concerned, right? But then she said, no, it's not just slavery. It's genocide. If it were just slavery, no big deal. Just stop and think about saying that. But the rhetorical effect is it has to be this bad for me to have bothered you with this. In other words, it's only because it is absolutely about the annihilation, complete annihilation, genocide of my people. That's the only thing that made me come here. And you realize when you go back to chapter 4 that that's kind of true. It's because that was deliverance of the people and survival of the people. God's people is what's key here. But then she adds this. Although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. If, say, we were all just thrown into slavery, if that's all it were, I wouldn't have said anything. Of course, that means that I wouldn't be your queen. I'd be taken off. So you'd still lose in that one. Notice how she just framed that, or what did she just accomplish by the way she worded this? It's beautiful. It's now personal for the king. It went from being a problem that was personal for Mordecai and national for the Jews. And Esther, remember, she took time to figure out how she was going to say this. And she has turned it around in such a way and laid it out to make this so that the king feels it personally. She knows this man. So what do we get then? Did she do a good job on this? Apparently so. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, all right, now I want you to imagine, what kind of emotion is he feeling right now? Anger and rage, yes. So you have to kind of put it in that. Who is he? You notice that she has not yet named it. She's built it around the situation. Why? Because she still needs to see his reaction first. Before the reveal. It's important that we get the reaction so that we get the reveal at the moment it needs to be. Who is he? And then who is, and where is he? What does that tell you, David? Yes, it is. Yes. Yes, this is very much the Nathan with David setup. But get you to understanding this is wrong. So when he says, where is he? Who is he? Could be just a matter of interest, though I think that the tenor of his statement was probably far greater than that. Where is he? I want to do something about this. And then, who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? Now, this is interesting because you've had this build up the same way she built up what was done for them. He has just built up to give you an idea about how he feels about whoever this is. Doesn't know who it is yet. Doesn't care. Okay? But notice this phrasing. Who would dare presume in his heart to do this thing? Haven't we been looking at the heart of Haman this whole time? Of what he's like? And that actually gets down to the core of it. What kind of man would do this? And that's one of the things that the book has been laying out. What kind of man would do this? So what do we get? This was all rise in action. This is the building of the tension. How are things going to turn out at this banquet? So we've got the conflict is because now, okay, how's she going to give this request? She puts it out there. So you have to have the king first has to ask. He asked her in verse 2, and then she gives that response for him to save her from and her people from this conspiracy. Okay, so now it just jumped up. The tension in the room, right? And then Xerxes asks for the name. All right. Now, before we turn the page, let's remember that they're having a pleasant banquet here. Just the three of them. The king has turned to Esther, what's your request? It all starts so pleasant. And she just turns it around and says, it's just this. There's someone that wants to kill me and all my people. Could you stop that? And he's looking and says, who is this? Now I want you to imagine Mr. Third Person over here. Okay. Discomfort is a rather mild way to put it, right? I want you to appreciate the situation. That's what the rising action. I want you to appreciate the way this is written so that you are anticipating, oh, what is he going to do? All right. So here we get to our climax. First part of verse 6. And the reveal. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. I can't say that without pointing. Right? All right? This. I don't know if she did, but I can't say it without pointing. Okay. That's, okay. Why do I have this as the climax? Because it's already clear how the king feels. That's already been resolved. The only question is he needs to put his anger now to know the name. And this is the high point of this story, is that big reveal that all of a sudden, this thing that's been happening behind the scenes, at least as far as the king is concerned, from chapter 3 when he signed off on this, or gave Haman the right to do it, that all of this now has come and surfaced. Climax. Here was the point of the banquet, was to get the king to want to do something to help the Jews, and that meant got to do something about Haman. All right. So you got this big reveal and it's funny because everybody else knows, right? In the story, as you're reading this, you all know this, but the king's the one who doesn't. And here he finds out it's Haman who is the one plotting the genocide. And I hear in the back of my head, as she says this, there's got to be one of the biggest gulps ever from Haman. Because he knows, once she starts saying that, you have to know he's getting worried. Is there something else going on I don't know about? But then it's you. So what's going to happen as a result? Okay. If we've got all the information out there now, the king is on the side of the Jews. He wants to do the very idea, really he's on the side of Esther, which puts him on the side of the Jews. Very idea. So now that he knows what's going to happen, and that's where we pick it up in verse 6 and through the first part of verse 10. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. I want to stop right there and note something. First of all, terrified, right? That you'd think so. He knows, he's reading the king. He knows what this means. If he's the one that's been plotting in such a way that is going to take the queen, the choice is between him and Esther. And the king's already made his decision. So he knows what's next. So what can you do? The interesting thing is he's terrified We already go back now to the king. He is enraged. So what does he do? He gets up. He walks out. Interesting, isn't it? They are at this banquet, and they've had this reveal. Two very different responses to the same thing. One of rage and one of terror. And everything's been turned now. The king gets up and walks out, essentially in the garden area. So he walks outside. So you would have had a nice area where the queen would have been serving and inviting them. He walks outside. I think you could probably correctly describe this as seething. It's just what is, it's in a sense, it's not what, it's trying to grasp this right, the guy closest to him of what he has done. The decision on what he's going to do, as far as having him killed, that's already been decided. So what is he going to do? This is where I think something is, again, interesting. But Haman stood before Queen Esther pleading for his life. What have we just had happen now with Esther? Look at how Haman, who had before, seemed to be the one in control and working the whole situation, including the king, and now he's pleading for his life from a woman, from the queen. She has been elevated by the nature of what she has done. Notice her situation since chapter 2, as far as her role, hasn't changed. She's queen. She's been queen since chapter 2. But because of her character, her courage, and her wisdom, this situation has placed her to where now she's got a man who is second in charge of the kingdom pleading with her. Now she is representative here, understand. She works as a representative of all the Jews for this account. But also this fact is important because it emphasizes that God uses all people and who will allow themselves through by doing the right thing to be used and seen value. So let's pick it up again. The king's outside. Queen is here. Now, I will ask, how did they arrange themselves at a banquet during, let's call it generically ancient times? Couches? Yeah, you would recline. You wouldn't sit up at chairs at a table. It would be lower, and you'd be down usually on a couch of some sort, kind of long benches, we'd say. This is important. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Now remember what he is doing. He's pleading for his life. She has stayed there, right, reclining. He has turned and he's been pleading with her, and you can see he's desperate, right? And in the process of being desperate, he's fallen over her. And at that point, with him leaned over as Esther's on the couch. I am not going to have Tracy come up here so I can demonstrate this. I have done that before. Sorry. Now the king comes in, and this is his view of this man who he's already found out was wanting to kill her. Now is positioned in such a way that it looks like he's assaulting her. And that's what we find from his response. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?" Bad enough he's been doing all of this behind the scenes. Now I'm right here. Yeah, this is any kind of question about it now is that this put him over the top, right? And again, it ties it in personally with the king, which is what Esther had intentionally done. As the word left the king's mouth, okay, in other words, it's interesting when it says the word, that was enough to say what's going to be happening, which is kill him. And the only question that's not as clear from this text is, was he killed there at that moment, or did they take him out and kill him? And it's actually, the wording is kind of unclear which way it was. Because of, I spent a lot of hours on this. This phrase, they covered Haman's face. And people are mixed about what this idiom fully means. Does this mean that it is, you put a cover over his face to denote that he is to be killed? Or that he was killed and that was done?
There's another thought that his face was flushed.
That he was, you see, they covered, I think the they is hard. I mean, the grammar gets difficult here. So I think, I understand that that's a possibility. I think it's probably further on down the road, but he is, and that would be in response to what the king said, right? Now, Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look. Now, I don't know how he means if it was a literal look and we can see him from here. Or right, look, here's an idea. Okay. The gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, remember that was just the morning reading, is standing at the house of Haman. Everybody knew that he just had it built. What's this for? I said, I'm going to kill Mordecai on that. It was known. Somebody had told them. Then the king said, hang him on it. It's questionable. How do you want to hang him on it? I like to think hang him on it. Why? Because it gets the irony. He was going to use it for Mordecai, who he wanted killed, put him on it, and he's going to die there. No. Haman's, yeah, that's right, homeowner. He was the bad guy in this. Is that what you're saying? Hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. That's actually the point. The preparation, it's deliberate drawing out of the irony. Remember we talked last time about this whole switch? This is the fulfillment of the whole irony of all this plan that Haman had laid out because he wanted Mordecai dead, right? Throughout this whole thing. And all of this is what leads to his own death at the hands of the king. So there you've got narcissism, just filled up with malice, all of that going on. So you've got the realization, miscalculated on this. Xerxes pulls back. He pleads for his life. That makes it worse. He's sentenced to death. And go take care of this, and he's executed. That leads us to the denouement, which at the end here, chapter 10, which is simply, then the king's wrath subsided. There is not then the king was sorrowful. There's no sorrow here. The emotional feeling of this is justice. This was finally, Haman got what he always deserved. Justice. And that was the point. Whenever you look at this, and now I want to ask you, though, the question. We've been going through and looking at this, and what this book is about. Is this the climax of the story? What? Oh, okay, good, Sandra. Because we don't have the big problem solved yet. It shows sometimes we'll personalize it. Haman's the problem. Actually, Haman produced the problem. That decree is still out there. And you got to do something about the decree. That hasn't been resolved. Because that hasn't been resolved, we're not to the climax of the story, even though we've had the climax and death of the antagonist. And we'll pick up there next week.